So a word on terminology. I've used the term fight or flight a few times. I try to remind myself to always say fight, flight, or freeze, because the fact is, freezing up is a very natural mammal, and therefore human, response to danger. And I feel like this is important for people to hear because sometimes in a stressful situation when we freeze up, we blame ourselves later. That actually happened to me a little bit. I went through a situation where I was assaulted. I was totally fine. It was a long time ago. But I did freeze up. I couldn't say anything. I didn't do anything. It almost felt like I didn't fully realize what had happened to me until I was shaking in my car later. And for a while, I kind of regarded that as a moment of failure and wished that I had, been more proactive at protecting myself in that moment. But this is one way that learning about the brain helped kind of heal me. I realize now that freezing is a completely normal response to a stressful and dangerous situation. So today I want to give you some practical tips on how you can manage your autonomic arousal level. In this video, we're talking a lot about ways to lower the engagement of the sympathetic division of your autonomic nervous system and boost the engagement of the parasympathetic division to go from fight, flight, or freeze to rest and digest. But I don't want to paint the sympathetic division as an entirely negative system. In fact, it's crucial for our survival. And moments of high sympathetic arousal can be really important to help us cope with emergency situations. If you didn't have an autonomic nervous system at all, you would die. So, these tips we're discussing for how to turn down the sympathetic division and turn up the parasympathetic is simply about getting you into a state of balance. Because we as humans, with all of our capacity to worry about danger on different levels, tend to hang out in the sympathetic arousal state too much. I was feeling crafty today, so I made a little model of the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. I've used these red cords to represent the chain of ganglia that sit on either side of the spine and enable the sympathetic division's response. And then up at the top, I have my panic button, which remember is located in the brainstem. This button actually says push instead of panic. And I left it because I think it's pretty accurate. The sympathetic division is there for those moments where you really need to push physically and emotionally to survive a crisis. So first, we're going to start by looking at some temporary conditions that all of us find ourselves in from time to time that make the sympathetic division of the ANS more likely to go off and start that fight or flight response that makes you anxious, so angry you could punch someone, or otherwise panicked in some sort of way. The sympathetic division is more likely to kick into high gear when we are sleep deprived. In fact, in a study of police officers who were playing a computer game designed to help them distinguish between dangerous assailants and innocent folks walking through the park, they were more likely to have a fear response to an innocent person in the video game when they had been sleep deprived the night before. Being hungry also makes you more susceptible to the fight-flight response. And, if you've ever had a hangry argument with your sweetheart on the way to a restaurant or over who's cooking dinner at home, you know how this feels. Interestingly, something as basic as being way too hot can make you more likely to fly into a rage. In the United States, in the South, very predictably every year, the murder rate in our large southern cities like Atlanta is directly correlated with how hot the summer is. So all of these, being too sleepy, too hungry, too hot, too cold, are conditions of homeostatic imbalance. And it's layer 1 that's monitoring for this kind of imbalance. And the reason that these imbalances make the sympathetic division more likely to fire up is that when you've already got a homeostatic imbalance, any additional danger stands to do more damage to your body. Some other things that can make you temporarily more likely to fly into fight, flight, or freeze are being in an unfamiliar place. And I'm going to explain later why familiarity is one of the really basic judgments that your limbic system is making when it decides how worked up to get about a potentially scary circumstance. Being in a negative mood or emotional state. So when we're already in a bad mood, we interpret neutral stimuli as negative. So this has been demonstrated experimentally in studies where they bring folks into the lab and they induce experimentally either a good mood or a bad mood. So they give the folks a good mood by telling them that they won a raffle. For the people who are randomly assigned to the bad mood condition, they tell them that they're getting a parking ticket. And then they have both groups sit down and look at faces with a neutral expression. And the people who are in a bad mood are more likely to rate those neutral faces as angry. So when we're in a negative mood, the world looks more scary and dangerous to our limbic system. So it's going to be handy to remember this list of temporary conditions that make your sympathetic division more likely to go off, because when you are headed into a particularly high stakes, stressful situation where you really want to keep your head, it's a great idea to make sure that none of these states apply to you. So here's a picture of me in the middle of a fight or flight response. So this is me trying to conduct my very first Zoom as a college professor, and boy, I did it all wrong. I was definitely sleep deprived. I skipped breakfast. I wasn't comfortable, and I'm completely unfamiliar with the technology. Sure enough, during the class, I was sweating and my cheeks got hot, and I really felt that rush of sympathetic arousal. Okay, so now let's talk about some long-term investments that you can make that over time will make your sympathetic division a little bit less trigger happy. So the first one is doing regular cardiovascular exercise. So the reason this works is that getting fit cardiovascularly lowers your resting heart rate and lowers your blood pressure. And when your heart rate and blood pressure are a little lower at their starting point, then the beginnings of these fight or flight arousal cycles don't feel as intense. Secondly, I encourage everyone to take the time and do what they need to do to heal from traumatic events that they've been through. When you've been through a traumatic event, your limbic system can temporarily have a heightened sense of danger. And it may be that your stress response is on a tighter hair trigger after a traumatic event. So you need to take the time and do the work to heal from that trauma so that your sympathetic division can kind of return to a more balanced state. And finally, a lot of people are able to manage their fight, flight, freeze response by changing their thinking patterns. So this is the goal of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is simply a therapeutic approach that's focused on the interplay between thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. We'll talk about it several times in this class, but for the purposes of this discussion, the way that cognitive behavioral therapy would help someone manage fight or flight is by correcting some thinking errors that the cortex makes, which amp up our sense of danger in certain situations. So one example is black and white thinking. If you have an orientation, say, towards academic success, where you think that anything less than an A is failure, and you have like this black and white line between doing acceptably and unacceptably, then you're creating a really tense and high pressure situation for yourself. And when you have a sort of medium performance, instead of viewing it as acceptable and part of, a normal ups and downs academically, you take it as a complete failure. And so we can talk more about this in the future, but usually people who work with a cognitive behavioral therapist to change some of these thinking patterns in the long run find that they're able to manage their sympathetic division arousal a little bit better. So those are strategies for lessening the reactivity of your sympathetic division and making fight, flight, or freeze responses a little bit less likely. Let's talk now about how to activate the parasympathetic division of your autonomic nervous system. Now remember, even though we've been using the idea of hitting a panic button, the way that these two systems function is actually a lot more like flipping a light switch. So when one system's turned on, the other system is turned down. So we can exploit the fact that these systems sort of work like a light switch and turn on the parasympathetic nervous system when we want to calm ourselves down. In my model of the parasympathetic division of the nervous system, I've shown how the nerves emerge directly from the cranium and then way down at the sacral part of the spine. And these long snaking nerves head to the organs that they're going to affect. So what are some basic ways to activate the parasympathetic division when you come home from a long and stressful day? First of all, you should feed yourself, you should get hydrated, and you should get physically comfortable. So, it can be hard to eat when we're feeling stressed, but when we do give our body nourishment, then that tells the body, hey, we've got something to digest. We better turn on this system that ups digestion. So a full belly usually brings on a little bit of this relaxing parasympathetic arousal. And this is one reason why stress eating can be so reinforcing for some of us, because we're getting just a little bit of stress relief as we eat the late night popcorn, in my case. So you can think of these three strategies as essentially taking care of your inner lizard. So if you've got a lizard in a terrarium and your job is to keep it alive, you give it good temperature, food, and water, and that's about all it needs. And from the perspective of your brainstem, that's about all it needs to go into this repair and restore cycle. Other strategies you can use to turn on the parasympathetic division are to seek social connection. Bit of advice for people who get nervous with public speaking is to make eye contact with a member of the audience. And even that tip works because by building a little bit of social connection, you can calm your nerves down. And the reason that this works is because we are mammals, and we are very social mammals. So if you think about the life of a lioness who goes out hunting during the daytime, faces dangers. When she's back in the den at night with all her cubs piled up on top of her, that social connection is a sign that the mammal is safe and that now is a good time to relax and let the body repair and restore itself. A lot of us are suffering right now from a lack of social connection. And because social connection is crucial to turning on the parasympathetic response, that lack of social connection, skin hunger is the medical term for the need to be touched, the need to be cuddled, it can really take a toll. So in the pandemic, I think it's more important than ever to use the technology we have to reach out digitally and stay engaged with friends. Similarly, putting yourself in a familiar situation and doing familiar activities is another way to sort of trick your mammal brain into recognizing that you are safe at the moment. And this is why when we're stressed out, we don't tend to watch the latest prestige drama that's building up in your Netflix queue, but instead maybe just watch season 3 of The Office for the 900th time, because that familiarity really tricks your mammal brain into recognizing that it's time to chill. So those strategies help you take care of your inner mammal. And finally, what's the contribution of cognition to turning on the parasympathetic division? Really, all you need your cortex to do is focus on the present moment and kind of get out of its own way. So our cortex is expert at projecting into the future, worrying about the past. So whatever activities help you ground yourself in the moment will help you activate your parasympathetic division. So when I'm working with crisis contacts who are really in a high state of sympathetic arousal, one of the things we do is talk them through a grounding exercise where they identify things that they can see and touch in their environment, and just kind of bringing attention to the physical reality where you are, hopefully at that moment, physically safe, can kind of help engage the parasympathetic division. So here's a photo of me with my parasympathetic division highly engaged. So I am cuddled up with my kiddo, experiencing that warm and fuzzy social connection. We're doing something familiar, watching reruns of Parks and Rec. We've got the snacks, we've got the comfy clothes, we are hydrated, we're living it up. Incidentally, my child said that I was only allowed to use this photo if I tell you all that they are cosplaying in this photograph. They didn't want you to think they wear the elf ears all the time, but they kind of wear the elf ears all the time. So before I became educated about these concepts, like a lot of people, I sort of thought of stress as something that happened to me. And I figured that the only escape from stress was the end of whatever the stressful situation was. But learning this information helped me realize that I need to regularly and proactively spend time engaging the parasympathetic division of my autonomic nervous system with these tips and tricks to balance my nervous system. And in fact, it's even more important to do these parasympathetic boosting practices when life is stressful.